What's going on, Mountaineer Nation? Welcome back into the Country Roads webcast. As always, I'm your host, Jordan Cruz, and spring practice, 1 week in the books now. Time for a little roster update. I figured here, hadn't done one since, a little bit ago. We learned of a couple players, one that will be transferring out of the program, one that's, having to retire medically due to some injury issues. And then we also have some position changes we can discuss here on the roster, as well as, a position that's kind of changing in terminology as well. So we're going to dive into all those updates here on our March 30th roster update here on the Country Roads webcast. I'm going to pull up the CRW roster tracker and let's get into some of these updates here as WVU football season has officially kicked off now with the start of spring practice. All right, if you've been following along roster updates here in the past, you're probably familiar with this document here. I'll try and keep a running track of the scholarship players on the roster, so you won't see any preferred walk-ons on here, but I'll try and note some of those. One of those that's been talked about actually is at the running back position. You'll see him this spring, Clay Ash, and according to Neil Brown, it sounds like a guy that could potentially maybe end up being a scholarship guy down the road even, one of those guys that earns a scholarship, a la, Preston Fox, Hudson Clement, a lot of those before him, although those were wide receivers, but you'll see Clay Ash, a walk-on running back, get some action this spring, as well as Judah Price, who's continuing to add size, a preferred walk-on, last year, and was an in-state favorite that a lot of people were glad to see join the Mountaineers. So that's a couple preferred walk-ons you'll see at the running back position. You see only 3 scholarship running backs on the roster for the spring, and CJ Donaldson is limited, not necessarily participating in the spring a ton. So you will see some of those preferred walk-ons at the running back position. So that's why I'm stating that, because you're not going to see them listed on here. I only do the scholarship players on this roster that I keep up with here on the CRW. Just makes it easier, makes it more brief on these updates as well. It makes it more easier for you guys to digest when you're looking at it. Wide receivers, like I said, when we get closer to the season, I'll break it down by, inside receiver, outside receiver. But of course, those are the scholarship receivers. But there is one change here. This is where I wanted to talk about one of those position changes. And this one was kind of rumored, but according to reports now from practice, it can be confirmed. TJ Johnson seems like he's playing more of a receiver role now rather than tight end, which it seemed like they were going to try him out last season. But for now, he's playing wide receiver here in the spring and seems to be catching some eyes as well with his height and his athleticism. Young legacy player, so hopefully a bright future, as well as, some of the other West Virginia receivers that are young. We saw them last year as freshmen really stand out. Traylon Ray, Rodney Gallagher, Hudson Clement, all going to have big years this year, I think. And then, of course, Jaden Bray's kind of been the talk of the spring thus far. The transfer in from Oklahoma State, I think, is really impressing a lot of people. Not only coaching staff, but you heard some of the defensive players talk about him as well. Aubrey Burks being one of those, and more on Aubrey in a minute. But then we get into the tight ends here, and you see, Cole Taylor also limited this spring, going to be out for most of the spring. Kind of similar story to CJ Donaldson. So you get some of these young guys a chance to step up. We know Traylon Davis is a great blocker, but Will Dixon's been handling a lot of the pass catching duties with Cole Taylor sitting on the sidelines, and seems like he's going to have a bright future at West Virginia as well as a pass catching tight end. I think the coaches seem to like him a lot, and then you're getting some of these youngsters some work. Jack Samarco, one of the early enrollees here as a true freshman, and Noah Braham, another, legacy player. His dad, of course, one of the all-time great offensive linemen, one of the all-time great stories here at West Virginia. He's going to be playing tight end slash, kind of fullback role, the way West Virginia uses those tight ends, almost like H-backs in this offense. Noah Braham, I think, has a bright future for this WVU program as well, much like his father in the past. Then moving on to the offensive line, I've swinged some things around here. Johnny Williams has been lining up as the, backup left tackle behind Wyatt Milam. We know he's a guy with a really bright future. Coaches are really high on him, love his size. He could be your left tackle of the future past Wyatt Milam, because at the right tackle, you're really going to have Nick Malone and Xavier Bosley battling it out for that position this season. I think Bosley, a really highly touted transfer coming over from Jacksonville State, where he was tutored by, Rick Trickett and Rich Rodriguez there. And Nick Malone, we saw his growth throughout his career, and he really helped the Mountaineers a ton last season, kind of a part-time starter, hoping to step into a full-time starter role this season. Same goes for Jaquay Hubbard. Seems like he's going to be able to do that. And they're also really high on Nick Cray, who redshirted last year. He's been running with the second team there at the guard position. Center, looks like Brandon Yates going to take over that role. Landon Livingston's been handling the second team duties, but look out for, Kyle Altuner when he gets here in the fall. I think he's going to have a say in that battle before it's all said and done. And then when we look at the left guard, this is when we have another, piece of injury news. I talked about some guys that were limited, but Thomas Remick is actually out for the spring. So we've been seeing a lot of Sully Weedman getting work there with the first teamers at the left guard position, and Mo Hamilton running with the second teamers. Flip over to the defensive side, and we got the newcomers here on the defensive line. TJ Jackson's the big standout when you're talking defensive lineman. I think him and Sean Martin have the ability to really be, both be forces on that defensive line for West Virginia as they, look to hopefully for the second straight season lead the Big 12 in sacks. But you look here at the defensive tackle position, and this is where we get into one of the, departures I was talking about. I mentioned we had a transfer, and then we had someone unfortunately retiring due to injury issues. And the player that is retiring that we're going to have to remove from the roster, unfortunately, is an in-state guy that a lot of us were really excited when he transferred over from Cincinnati, Zakai Lawton. But he's just had those nagging and lingering injuries that unfortunately are forcing him to medically retire from football. So he will not be with the program this season. So we'll remove him from the roster for now. We know that West Virginia was a little bit over the scholarship limit, or was going to be by the time, the players that are coming in the summer/fall enrolled here at WVU. So we knew some players would be leaving, whether it would be transfer portal or other ways. We now know that we have one leaving via, injury, and we do have another one that's going to be hitting the portal. We'll talk about that momentarily. But sticking here at the defensive tackle position, Elijah Kinsler is another true freshman that's enrolled early. Seems like he has a bright future. And speaking of bright futures, Asani Redwood, he's been a guy that we've all been excited about. We finally start to see flashes of it late last season, but unfortunately, he's going to miss this spring as well due to an injury. He has yet to, go through a spring here at WVU, so hopefully next season he'll finally get to have one, but hopefully he's able to come around in time for fall camp because I think he's got, the potential to have a good season. Moving on throughout the defense here at the nose tackle spot, kind of the same faces you expected to see. Nate Gabriel is another true freshman that's enrolled early that's here for the spring. And then here we get to our other big change. And this one is really cool, I think, or interesting, I guess you could say, because it's probably unexpected. But West Virginia, we know they hired Victor Cabral to coach the outside linebackers. And with that, it seems like, a little bit of a terminology change has come along as well. West Virginia is switching to a 3-4 scheme. We've covered that in the past. But these are no longer called the Bandits. We've learned in Victor Cabral's press conference, they're going to be called the Spurs now. So the Spur position instead of the Bandit position now on the West Virginia defense. So you're going to have the Spur on the one side of the field and then the Spear on the other now instead of the Bandits. Not confusing at all, right? But no, I like it. Spur kind of harkens back to, the old days, in the early 2000s of West Virginia when they were running the 3-3 stack. I think they had one of the positions, the safeties that they had then was called the Spur. So, here it's more of a linebacker position. But nonetheless, West Virginia working at the Spur here throughout the spring is going to be Tyron Bradley, Ty French, Braden Dudley, and another early enrollee, this time a 4-star recruit, Obion Wuka, who has a really bright future as a pass rusher. And Ty French coming in from Gardner-Webb, FCS transfer up to this level. I think that he's really going to make a big impact for West Virginia. We know Tyron Bradley looked good in the bowl game with that one-handed interception. So I think bringing Victor Cabral in, hopefully West Virginia gets production from, what used to be known as the Bandits, now known as the Spur position. And I know this update's a little bit more lengthy than the usual roster updates, but haven't done one, a lot since spring started. And there's a lot of topics I wanted to touch on with these position changes, the terminology changes, and what have you. Then here at the other linebacker spot, you'll see I haven't broken it up between the Will and the Mike yet. Want to see how that plays out. West Virginia has several guys that are going to factor in. And so once, much like I said with receiver, once we split it to inside and outside, once we get closer to the season, we'll do the same here on this side of things with this document, splitting it up between the Will linebacker and the Mike linebacker. But we do have the other change that I was talking about roster-wise here, and that is Tyreek Austin Cave leaving the program, hitting the transfer portal. I think, bringing in Reed Carrico, maybe he saw the writing on the wall that that's a guy that the coaching staff was really high on. But nonetheless, he's a guy that I hope lands on his feet. I think he, had good potential transferring in from Miami. Never really got a chance to get on the field here too much, but hopefully at his next destination, that's, not the case. But he was no longer on the roster now, so those are the two players that will be removed from this roster. As you see, Zakai Lawton and Tyreek Austin Cave now. So those are the linebackers remaining on the roster for West Virginia this spring, scholarship-wise. And then we move on here to the Spear position, where I wanted to talk a little bit about Aubrey Burks, because he is working here in the spring. He's going to be a guy that's cross-trained. He mentioned that in his press conference. He's playing the Spear, also going to play, some of the Cat again in the fall. But I think playing him at the Spear really could be a great move for West Virginia. I think back to that 2020 defense that was really highly rated nationally, number one pass defense in the country, and Tyke Smith was playing great at that Spear position. And I think Aubrey Burks has a lot of the same intangibles and same football traits and football skills that Tyke kind of did. So I think playing him closer to the line where you can blitz him a little bit could really help, especially when he has a whole offseason to prepare and do that. We saw late last season West Virginia use him in that role some, and it really helped. So I like playing Aubrey Burke some at the spear here throughout the spring, and we'll hope that continues. And then you get Zay Jennings, another true freshman that's enrolled early that's really, I think, turned some heads here in his early time on campus. They're working him at the spear. Raleigh Collins also playing the spear, and then a preferred walk-on, not a scholarship guy, but we saw him play some last season in the defensive backfield. Avery Wilcox is going to be playing the spear this year as well. Then we get into the cornerbacks, and we've talked about these a ton. I don't want to go over this too much. Like I said, this roster update's gone on too long already, so I won't ramble on. But the one thing I did want to mention here that I thought was of note, lately was Aiden Garn. Seems like he's cross-training not only to be a corner, but to potentially be a safety as well, factor in, as a free or a cat for West Virginia. And I think that that's good. They're cross-training a lot of these guys, especially when you look at the cornerback position where West Virginia has brought in several talented guys. You only really have 2 spots there, so you really only need, 4 guys, essentially 2 guys and a 2 deep. And then you can have another guy in there as a rotational guy. But if someone's odd man out, why not train them at safety so they can provide depth there? Because you never know what could happen throughout the season, injury-wise or anything else when, this NIL transfer portal era. And then, of course, the safeties, Jaheim Joseph, the transfer in from Northwestern, been getting work at the free safety along with Israel Boyce, another early enrollee, true freshman that's here on campus for the spring. And don't factor out, like I said, Aiden Garnes playing some safety, free or cat. And then you look at the cats, Anthony Wilson, Josiah Jackson, Aiden Nelson. And then your specialists, of course, remain the same. Mike Hayes, Oliver Shaw, and Austin Brinkman. But there you have it, a way too long March 30th roster update here on the Country Roads webcast. Apologies for the length here on this one. Hopefully you stuck it out throughout this entire video. If you did, hey, give yourself a pat on the back by hitting that thumbs up button. It also helps here by pushing this video out to more people, helps that YouTube algorithm, helps it reach more Mountaineer Nation. And if you enjoy WVU football content, be sure to hit the subscribe button as well. Putting out a ton of it here as spring football progresses. And of course, the closer that we get to fall, the more football content we'll be putting out. But had to do this roster update because, some position changes. Of course, as you see in the thumbnail, kind of the main impetus, a couple of players no longer on the roster that we wanted to remove from the roster, but also thought it was very pertinent to, change the name of the bandit position to the spur position, because that is now the terminology within West Virginia's new defense. Victor Cabral on board and a 3-4 scheme there. We're going to see with that West Virginia defense this season that I think has a ton of depth, definitely the most depth this coaching staff has had on a defense yet since they've been here at West Virginia. And just another reason to be excited for this 2024 season. But having said that, I hope you enjoyed this roster update. Stay tuned here to the CRW for more roster updates in the future, as well as depth chart updates, snap counts, weekly player grades, all that once the season gets rolling. And we're going to continue to cover, the spring football here. Going to have the, first spring Q&A stream coming up here later today, and going to have one of those per week throughout spring football practice, and the same will go throughout the fall. There's usually actually 2 a week, so if you're a WVU football fan, be sure to subscribe here to the CRW. Really appreciate that. As always, I'm Jordan Cruz, and until next time, let's go Mountaineers.